At 6 a.m., an orange notice from the HOA was taped to my front door. At 6:30, Tom from next door waved at me from my own driveway like nothing in the world was off. Suburban Austin runs on small agreements. You cut your grass on the same Saturday. You roll trash cans back before noon. You share jumper cables, spare Wi-Fi, a cup of sugar if someone actually still bakes. Favor economies make neighborhoods hum, but they also hide imbalances. The archetype is simple. The helper thinks he's maintaining social glue. The taker thinks he's maintaining what he deserves. You've met both. Sometimes they share a fence. I'm 32, a UX designer with a spreadsheet for everything, including my utility bills. March to April jumped 40% with no heat wave and no guests. In systems, unexplained spikes mean either a bug or a boundary issue. In neighborhoods, they usually mean the same thing. You tell yourself it's the dryer or the vampire draw from the standing desk, because it's easier than admitting you missed something in your own house. You've made that bargain too. Accept the small weirdness, so your morning coffee stays peaceful. Tom was the kind of neighbor people called Andy. He owned 5 ladders, but asked to borrow mine because it was the right height. He used words like community when he meant convenience. Archetypally, he played the helpful everyman, a guy who knows everyone, remembers birthdays, waves with both hands. But watch the pattern. Favors flow one way until the invoice arrives in a different envelope. If you don't set terms, someone else will set them for you. The EV charger was my proud little ritual. I parked, plugged in, and went inside to the click of the kitchen timer I used as a reminder to check the app. I kept the cord on a wall cradle beside the driveway. Visible, accessible, more friendly tech than Fortress. You can already see the flaw, right? Technology promises control, but design for friendliness long enough, and you design for exposure. I told myself it was fine. We live on a quiet cul-de-sac. We look out for each other. 2 nights before the orange notice, I woke up thirsty at 2:12 a.m. The charger app showed. Charging paused, not ended, paused. Outside my window, a faint glow crossed the blinds, like headlights angling away. Maybe a rideshare, I thought. Maybe nothing. You do this too. Explain the data until it stops being alarming. I went back to bed, promising myself I'd check the cable in the morning. I didn't, the notice said. Allegation of power diversion under review. It read like a software bug report written by a hall monitor. I stood in my doorway, the HOA font yelling in all caps, while Tom jogged over in gym shorts, smiling, asking if I'd seen something weird with the lights last night. I said no out loud. In my head, a more accurate script loaded, patterns, boundaries, invoices, and somewhere between my front step and his grin, I decided I was done calling the spike a glitch. HOA letters aren't just paper. They're social contracts dressed up as rules. The archetype behind them is authority, impersonal, faceless, but with teeth. You don't fight authority head-on unless you've stacked evidence, because authority thrives on procedure. It doesn't matter who smiles more on the sidewalk. It matters who has documentation. That's the part most neighbors forget. I knew my bills. I had 4 months of screenshots from the utility app saved in a folder called Household Tracking. That's the analyst role, someone who lives in numbers to avoid surprise. The analyst sees life as a set of dashboards, and when the lines go jagged, he doesn't sleep until the reason surfaces. That folder wasn't paranoia. It was survival in a world where everyone says, it's not a big deal, until it suddenly is. Maybe you keep mental dashboards, maybe written ones, but you have them. Tom didn't do dashboards. Tom did charm. He believed in the archetype of the neighborly fixer, the man who makes problems dissolve by knowing the right people and offering the right jokes. Watch how fixers move. They deflect detail, they expand context, they tell you, don't sweat it. And sometimes you buy it, because sweating it feels exhausting. That morning, standing in my driveway, I realized the dynamic wasn't new. Tom had borrowed tools without return dates. He'd asked for help moving furniture. Just for a minute, that lasted an hour. Each favor felt small, but archetypal takers build through increments, not shocks. They don't storm the gates, they lean. You've had a leaner in your life too, the friend, coworker, relative who discovers that the more agreeable you are, the more they can balance their weight on your spine. The orange notice was leverage. Tom had framed the story before I knew it was being told. To the HOA, I wasn't the analyst. I was the alleged offender. The irony wasn't lost on me. I tracked my power, budgeted every cent, and now the system said I was stealing. You think the truth will rescue you on its own, but truth without narrative is just data. And in neighborhoods, narrative always wins first. That night, I set an alert on the Charger app. Anytime the cable engaged outside my schedule, I'd get a ping. It wasn't about catching him. It was about reclaiming the role. If Tom wanted to play the fixer, I would lean harder into the analyst. And if authority needed a story, I'd have one with timestamps, logs, and maybe even a video feed. At 1:47 a.m., the ping came. The alert vibrated my phone against the nightstand, and I sat up fast. Data has a way of changing posture. You can shrug off suspicions, but when the numbers arrive in real time, your body reacts. I slipped on sneakers, pulled a hoodie over my head, and walked quietly to the window. My driveway lights were off, but my Charger showed active. The analyst in me felt validated. The neighbor in me felt something colder, betrayal on my own concrete. Out there, Tom's SUV was angled into my driveway like it belonged. Cable stretched from my Charger to his port, glowing faint green. Archetypally, it was textbook trespasser behavior, taking access because proximity blurs the lines. The trespasser convinces himself it's harmless, maybe even deserved. He pays dues, waves at meetings, helps set up the holiday lights. So why not skim a little? You've known people like that. They dress their taking as balance. I didn't storm outside. That's what Tom would have expected. Confrontation, yelling, maybe a scene that would fold neatly into his version of events. Instead, I opened the app, tapped pause, and watched the glow blink out. He looked around, confused, then unplugged in a hurry. His SUV backed down my drive, taillights stuttering like a kid caught sneaking cookies. The archetype shifted right there. He wasn't the fixer anymore. He was the corner taker, forced to improvise. And corner takers often go louder, not quieter. If you've ever called someone out gently and watched them escalate, you know the pattern. The louder they get, the less they believe their own script. I had the log, the timestamp, and the visual of his car at my outlet. But evidence is just ammo. You still need delivery. Authority wants process, not emotion. And if I went first, I framed the story. If I waited, Tom would try again, maybe with more creativity, maybe with a new angle that shifted blame back on me. In moments like this, you measure risk. Confrontation now or documentation later. I chose later. I set up a cheap motion camera facing the Charger, the kind you can buy at any big box store. It wasn't about catching him again. It was about building the architecture of truth, so complete that authority couldn't ignore it. The next morning, Tom waved as usual, holding his travel mug like the picture of suburban peace. I waved back, calm, carrying a different kind of mug, coffee in one hand, evidence in the other. When you live in a neighborhood like ours, breakfast isn't just eggs and toast. It's optics. Who waves, who lingers, who looks busy. Archetypes act out at the curb as much as behind closed doors. Tom's wave that morning wasn't casual, it was rehearsal. He wanted to show the block that everything was normal, that he was the friendly everyman, that if there was tension, it must have come from me. You've seen this kind of roleplay. At work, it's the colleague who smiles loudest after undercutting you in a meeting. In family, it's the relative who tells jokes at dinner while quietly rewriting history. The pattern is ancient. Control the social surface, and people stop digging for the roots. Inside, I opened my laptop and sorted the Charger logs into a clean chart. I added the utility spikes, aligned with the timestamps. I even pulled my payment receipts, just in case authority needed proof of good faith. That's the analyst's move, not just showing the glitch, but connecting the dots, so no one can claim coincidence. Truth is persuasive only when it looks organized. The motion camera had already paid off. At 1:52 a.m. the night before, it caught Tom pulling in, plugging up, then looking around with the unease of someone borrowing without asking. It wasn't violent. It wasn't flashy. It was plain theft dressed in suburbia. But here's the provocation for you. How many times have you excused small trespasses because they weren't dramatic enough to confront? How many times did you let it slide until the pattern hardened? By noon, the HOA email inbox had my report. Calm language, attached files, time-stamped video stills. I didn't accuse, I presented. That's the difference between ranting and framing. Authority responds better to structure than outrage. You know this if you've ever tried to argue a bill or appeal a charge. Show your homework, and they stop treating you like noise. Tom didn't know yet. He was still jogging laps around the cul-de-sac, still petting dogs, still setting himself up as the reasonable neighbor. Archetypally, he was doubling down on his chosen mask. But when masks meet evidence, one of them cracks. That night, the camera caught him again. Same time, same SUV. Only this time, when the cable blinked off mid-charge, he didn't just unplug. He looked straight into the lens. The look lasted 2 full seconds. That's long in surveillance time. He knew the lens was there now. Archetypally, this was the shift, the moment when the taker stops believing he's invisible and begins plotting how to turn the spotlight back. You've seen it in other arenas too. The coworker caught copying slides who suddenly starts accusing others of laziness, or the friend who borrows money then insists you're the one keeping score. It's the same maneuver every time. Exposure triggers inversion. The next morning, Tom didn't wave. Instead, he stood at the edge of my driveway, coffee in hand, like he was claiming territory. "Strange how the HOA's cracking down," he said. "You hear anything?" His tone was casual, but the archetype had shifted again. Now he was the pretend investigator, fishing for what I knew. You've probably fielded this kind of question yourself. Loaded small talk meant less to inform than to probe. I answered lightly, "Not really. Just saw the notice." And that was it. No extra words. The analyst understands silence is data too. When you withhold, you force the other person to fill the space, and their choices reveal where their head is. He shrugged too quick and walked back to his porch. Meanwhile, authority stirred. The HOA chair replied to my email with a curt line. "Thank you, we will review." No timeline, no assurances. That's how authority operates, measured, detached, never giving you the satisfaction of urgency. You think they're ignoring you, but really they're deciding how the story looks to the group. The trick is not to panic during the lull. That night, Tom didn't plug in. The driveway stayed empty, my charger untouched. But still, I checked the app twice, 3 times, as though expecting the ping. That's the residue trespass leaves behind. Even when the act stops, the vigilance stays. You know the feeling. Once you've caught someone crossing your line, you don't look at the line the same way again. 2 days later, another orange notice arrived. Same bold font, same tape on the door. But this time, the wording was different. It said, "Evidence suggests repeated unauthorized use of your property. Please attend a hearing Thursday at 7 p.m. to present your side." Now the roles were clear. I wasn't the alleged offender anymore. I was the witness. And Tom, whether he admitted it or not, was about to be named. HOA hearings are theater. The board sits behind folding tables in a borrowed library room, papers stacked like props, while neighbors cluster in chairs pretending not to stare. Authority thrives on this stage. It's part courtroom, part classroom, part church. Everyone knows the script, even if no one says it out loud. Authority speaks, you nod, order is restored. But here's the twist. Archetypal roles collide in these rooms. The analyst shows up with charts and logs. The fixer tries charm and storytelling. The bystanders whisper judgments without ever raising a hand. If you sat through a PDA meeting or a condo board session, you know the choreography. What matters isn't the raw facts. It's whose role resonates most with the audience. I walked in with a binder, not because I'm dramatic, but because paper carries weight authority respects. Digital screenshots feel slippery. Printed evidence says permanence. My hands weren't shaking, but my shoulders were tighter than usual. Across the room, Tom leaned back in his chair like a man who just jogged 5 miles, relaxed, even smug. That's the archetypal gambler posture. Bet that charm beats structure. When my turn came, I didn't launch into a speech. I laid out the sequence: utility spikes, charger logs, video stills, calm, clipped sentences. Authority doesn't want emotion, they want clarity. And here's where the provocation hits you. How many times in your life did you bury facts under feelings and lose the room? Facts without narrative fall flat, but feelings without facts evaporate. The art is combining both in a way that doesn't beg. Tom went next. He leaned into performance. "I've lived here 10 years. I shovel the sidewalks. I bring people's trash cans in when they're sick. I don't know what's going on with his charger, but accusing me, that's not the neighborhood spirit." He gestured broadly, inviting the bystanders to nod along. Classic fixer rhetoric. Frame yourself as the victim of overzealous policing, and suddenly the analyst looks like a scold. The board listened, impassive. Authority always does. They don't reveal which way the current flows until they're ready. When they finally spoke, it wasn't judgment, it was procedure. "We'll review both accounts and follow up within a week." Walking out, Tom smirked just enough for me to see. Archetypally, that was the gambler again, convinced the room had tilted his way. But I knew something he didn't. Authority loves procedure, yes, but they love airtight evidence even more. And my binder was heavier than his smile. The week after the hearing felt stretched thin, like waiting for medical results. That's how authority works. It creates suspense by design. You keep checking your email, refreshing, replaying the meeting in your head, and the archetypal truth is this: authority knows people will reveal more in silence than in speech. When you're left waiting, you either panic, confess, or double down. Tom chose double down. He stopped waving entirely. Instead, he started small theatrics. His SUV parked deliberately close to my driveway, his trash bins nudged an inch onto my side. Archetypally, this was the provoker, someone who tests whether the analyst will break character and lash out. Because if I exploded, he could pivot back into fixer, telling everyone I was the unstable one. You've seen this play out before, maybe in a workplace feud where the louder side tries to bait the quieter one into missteps. Meanwhile, the neighbors began to murmur. Mrs. Kravitz across the street asked casually if my car was working fine. Another neighbor joked about installing a coin slot on my charger. That's how gossip flows. Never direct, always wrapped in humor or curiosity. Archetypes ripple through communities. The curious onlooker, the side-taker, the avoider. And when your issue becomes the block's entertainment, you realize narrative isn't just between you and authority, it's communal currency. I kept my role, logs updated nightly, camera footage stored, screenshots organized. The analyst's patience isn't glamorous, but it's resilient. And here's where I'll provoke you. How often have you abandoned patience for catharsis, only to regret it later? Documentation feels boring, but it's the weapon that doesn't misfire. 5 days in, an email landed. Subject line: Outcome of Power Diversion Review. I opened it slow, scanning for tone before words. Authority's voice is always coded. This one read: Upon review of the submitted evidence, the board concludes that unauthorized use occurred. The responsible party will be issued a formal violation and restitution request. No penalty applies to the complainant. Relief didn't arrive with trumpets. It came quiet, like air leaving a balloon. Archetypally, the analyst had prevailed, not with charisma, but with precision. Yet victory in neighborhoods is never clean. The very next evening, Tom was back outside, leaning on his SUV, staring across the drive as if nothing had been settled at all. Restitution in HOA language meant dollars, not apologies. The board ordered Tom to cover the estimated overage on my bill plus a fine. On paper, that was closure. But neighborhoods don't run on paper, they run on perception. Archetypally, the condemned neighbor never admits guilt outright. He rewrites the story, so he's the martyr. And true to form, Tom leaned into that role. He started telling anyone who'd listen that the board had singled him out over a misunderstanding. At block gatherings, he'd shake his head and mutter about witch hunts. If you've ever watched someone spin loss into victimhood, you know the pattern. Turn punishment into proof of persecution. That's how they salvage dignity, while still avoiding accountability. The irony was that some neighbors bought it, not because they believed him, but because siding with noise feels safer than siding with silence. Archetypally, these were the fence-sitters, people who avoid choosing until the outcome is obvious. They'd nod at me politely but laugh at his jokes too. You've been there, right? Watching people hedge their loyalty because they fear picking the wrong team. For me, the real win wasn't the fine. It was the shift in vigilance. The charger logs calmed back down. The motion alert stopped buzzing at odd hours. My utility bill dropped back to baseline. Data returned to predictability, and predictability is the analyst's oxygen. Still, I found myself checking the app nightly, a residue of mistrust. Once a boundary is breached, Even restored order feels temporary. Then came the twist. A letter slid into my mailbox. Not from the HOA, not from a utility company, but handwritten in Tom's jagged scrawl. Just one page. No apology, no denial. Just 7 words. "You should have talked to me first." It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but archetypally, it was a reframing attempt, the taker trying to flip the story, so the problem was my process, not his actions. And as I held that paper in my hand, I realized the hearing might have ended, but the neighborhood narrative hadn't. Handwritten notes carry a weight email never does. They're intimate, deliberate, and possible to forward without context. Tom knew that. Archetypally, this was the manipulator trying to reclaim control through personal channels. When you get a note like that, you're supposed to feel guilty for escalating instead of just talking it out. You've probably faced this move. Someone breaks a rule, then frames your response as the bigger offense. I read it twice, then pinned it to the inside of my binder. Not out of sentiment, but for continuity. Documentation is a habit you don't abandon midway. The analyst in me knew that if the story flared again, this letter could serve as Exhibit C, proof that Tom acknowledged the act indirectly by suggesting a different way I should have handled it. Socially, the note did something subtle. It shifted a few neighbors' tone. "He's not a bad guy," one said at the mailbox. Another hinted that maybe I'd gone a little formal by looping in the board. That's how narratives evolve, slowly, through sympathetic framing. Archetypally, Tom was stepping into the victim philosopher role, casting himself as misunderstood while implying I was rigid. Here's the provocation for you. How often have you let someone recast themselves as the wounded party because you didn't want to argue over perception? It's easier to let the story drift than to relitigate every detail. But easy isn't always safe. I stayed consistent. Friendly waves, polite small talk, nothing more. No escalation, no side conversations. My power bill stayed flat, my charger untouched. Authority had ruled, and functionally, the problem was solved. But neighborhoods don't measure victory in rules. They measure it in relationships. And though my driveway was secure, my standing in the cul-de-sac felt thinner, like a fence mended but still leaning. One Saturday morning, as I rinsed the car, Tom walked over, travel mug in hand. He didn't smile this time. He just asked, "You gotta keep acting like this forever?" The archetype had shifted yet again. Not fixer, not victim. Now he was challenger. And challengers don't always want resolution. Sometimes, they just want to see how far you'll hold the line. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. That's how challengers operate. They don't need volume, they need pressure. He wanted me to flinch, to soften, to admit the board had overreacted. Archetypally, it was the final push. If charm, deflection, and victimhood had failed, maybe intimidation would tilt the balance. I didn't engage, just rinsed the soap from my windshield, nodded once, and said, "We're fine." It wasn't agreement. It was boundary in its simplest form. Short, steady, closed. You've had moments like that too, where the smartest thing isn't the speech you rehearse in your head, but the restraint you choose in real time. He lingered, waiting for more. When none came, he turned and walked back to his porch. That was the end of it. No apology, no flare-up, no reconciliation. Just quiet withdrawal. Archetypally, he returned to the background figure, still present, still neighbor, but stripped of the authority he once assumed. Over the next weeks, the block moved on. Lawn mowers buzzed, kids biked past, holiday lights went up. Authority had ruled, but more importantly, narrative had stabilized. People still joked lightly, but the energy shifted. Tom wasn't the fixer anymore. He was the guy who'd pushed too far. And in communities, reputations don't vanish, they calcify. Here's the reflection for you. Boundaries don't end with penalties, they end with consistency. It wasn't the fine that changed the story. It was me staying in the analyst role long enough for the truth to outlast his versions. You've got your own driveways, at work, in families, among friends, where someone leans too heavy. The question is never if you'll be tested, but whether you'll hold your role when it matters. By summer, my bills were predictable, my charger unused by anyone else. The binder sat in my closet, thicker than I'd planned, but complete. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. Archetypally, that's how the analyst ends stories. Not with applause, but with balance restored. Quietly, I understood something bittersweet. You can't choose your neighbors, but you can choose your line. And once drawn, the line is what lets you live in peace.